You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Rathe. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Road to Nationals. Have you played any yet?
No, I have 2 this weekend. I don't know if you heard, but I've got some extra cardio booked this weekend for the Fab Fitness month. I will be domesticating this so-called wolf pack in Oklahoma. It's funny. I texted Stephen Woolley from Team Covenant this morning. I was like, "Hey man, you gonna be at Edmond?" He was like, "Yes, I will, but I'm certainly not gonna see you there because I have hit them up for the last 2 and been like, hey, you guys going to Edmond? See you there." And then I wake up and it's like, oh, you got to get up at 5 a.m. I was like, But this time I'm going up the night before. We're booking a hotel, so I'll definitely be there. Maybe.
Good call. Wow, I hope to see some results. Last time our draft didn't go so well, so I hope to see you redeem the limited side for Arsenal Pass against the Team Covenant folk. But anyway, Brendan, here we are, episode 66. And we've got an interesting podcast this week. A lot of discussion and discourse in the community right now. A lot of different topics actually sort of bubbling to the surface. And this week, Brendan, we're going to share kind of our sort of like hot takes, or I guess some of the things that are on our mind about Flesh and Blood that we want to discuss. We've done this blind. So both of myself and Brendan have actually thought about the things that maybe, we want to talk about. We want to discuss things that are interesting to us about Flesh and Blood, takes we have on the game that we want to share. But we kept them from each other because we want them to be a surprise, or I guess fresh to each other, to see kind of where we line up on certain things and then to discuss them in the show. Isn't that right, Brendan?
Yep, it is. I know that we accidentally figured out that we have one in common, but I think a lot of people will have that one in common with us.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Definitely want to discuss that. It's probably top of my list. So we'll get to it when we get into the main topic of the show. But first of all, Brendan, how was your week in Flesh and Blood? What did you get up to?
Just testing. So I was really surprised that there weren't any local road to nationals here. I think week 1, there might have been a CC one. But yeah, there was just nothing really available. I have 2 this weekend, one of which is in Oklahoma, and then the other one is here in Dallas, and then I should have some the weekend after that. I'm so happy to finally play, right? I've been doing a lot of like draft VOD review for testing, as well as like we have draft gauntlet decks that we play into each other, swap out some cards, kind of figure out the pick orders a bit more organically if we can, and see how things do when paired. So I think I've gotten a lot better, but I haven't been able to draft very much. So I'm pretty excited for this Road to Nationals.
Yep. Yeah, nice. For me, it's no Road to Nationals last weekend, no Road to Nationals this weekend. They're all out of state, so I'm not traveling for any. There was one close to me last weekend, but I've decided to just kind of take 2 weeks of downtime. The calendar's pretty hectic, as we've just found out, for the rest of the year for Flesh and Blood. And just, I think, a good opportunity to take some downtime, spend some time with friends and family, and still playing a bit of Flesh and Blood, still doing a bit of testing. So most evenings I do get in my hour of training. It's like going to the gym, but it's the Flesh and Blood gym in my very office here. So yeah, got into a draft last night as well, which is awesome. Trying to find drafts twice a week if I can around locally. Not always easy depending on like distance as well. Sydney's a big place, but did get in a draft last night. Had a broken Icelander deck and had a lot of fun. But otherwise, no, a bit of a quieter week. I've got one more Road to Nationals happening next weekend, so not this coming weekend. Next weekend will be the last one, and it's a draft one, so looking forward to that. I played 1 CC, and it'll be 2 drafts. So yeah, it's been fun. It's great seeing with locals at the moment as well. Obviously, people chasing some of that XP to get that nationals qualification. Armories are pretty buzzing at the moment as well, which is good to see.
That's crazy. It's so funny because that's literally the opposite of what my experience was. I have not had the opportunity to do drafts. And I actually traveled, I spent about an hour plus in the car to go to a draft that didn't fire. So that's interesting that it's notably picked up on your end, where I haven't seen it yet on my end. I have been able to curate some private groups with just locals and meet up there and do some drafts. But yeah, I guess it's not. I'm not saying that this is across the board either, or even it applies to like all the other stores, the other days of their drafts, because I am a bit unplugged. But I was surprised to see on that weekend with these Road to Nationals looming, nothing conflicting, to not see people there.
I wonder if it's one thing that has been done quite well, I think, by the community in Australia is discussion with the stores and sort of some of the, I guess, more what would you call them, like I guess senior players in those areas, the players who help organize community and events and promote and stuff like that, to make sure that the Road to Nationals don't clash. We've got a lot of Road to Nationals on different weekends, different stores, even communicating with each other. And I think leading into that is stores changing their armories to be the formats that match as well. So I think they're just working together, and I think that's helping a lot of local players and even, of course, helps the stores as well. If they're all working together, actually, it ends up helping. You just get more players through the door for those Road to Nationals if they're not clashing. I do wonder. I do wonder if it's a little bit anecdotal for me at a couple of stores. Weekends are busy right now, with Road to Nationals, so maybe players aren't coming out to armories maybe as much as I think because of Road to Nationals on the weekends. Maybe they're setting the time aside. Weekly Flesh and Blood is Road to Nationals right now. But yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like, especially for a core group of players out there who are maybe trying to get those last few points of XP or whatever it might be, that certain armories seem to be a bit busier. So yeah, again, anecdotally, I'm actually not at these events. I'm just hearing it. So.
Well, that's it.
I was at the draft last night though, so.
Well, anyway, why don't you take us into the news on that?
Yeah, biggest one to start with, Brendan. We have some details for Nationals, not all, but we do have Worlds. We have a confirmation for Worlds happening 4th to the 6th of November in San Jose, California, hosted by Channel Fireball, with more details to come. So we have a date, we have a location, and we know who's going to be running the event. It's good to finally have this. Won't dive into that kind of side of it too much, Brendan, but obviously really good news. We'll get into that in the main topic. And this is fed into by National Championships, which are taking place September 10th to 25th. 38 countries. We've got a mix of open and invite-only events, which if you go to Flesh and Blood, vabtcg.com, LSS's mothership website, you can see what events are happening in your country for Nationals, whether they're open invite, whether there's a mix of class constructed only and class constructed draft. Majority of the invite-only events are CC and draft. I think the bigger sort of countries that have those higher caps, bigger events, 2-day events, and then some are 1-day CC events. So you can go and check all those out. All dates and venues are not yet confirmed, which is, I guess, a little bit of a concern, considering the fact that we are less than 2 months out from the start of Nationals. But it looks like we're probably going to get those in the next few days. But Brendan, US Nationals is confirmed 23rd to the 25th of September. Looks like we're going to get a calling at the same time, hosted by Star City Games in North Carolina. So, for you US-based players, you now know when and where your Nationals is going to be. We're going to talk a bit about scheduling, I think, Brendan, but any kind of top thoughts on finally getting some Worlds info, some Nationals info? How are you feeling?
Well, I can't say that I'm upset to get info, but this is the most upset I've ever been with Legend Story Studios. Literally since I started playing the game. I waited a very, very long time to book my trip to Europe and to coordinate additional time off, not really for myself, but for my partner, and sort of finally and take like a Europe trip. I'm done.
As part of PT Lille, right?
Yes, as part of PT Lille, going into like the 1st of October or the first week of October, and yeah, that's a conflict. And after this, the real trouble is not really me. It's more my partner with the time off and all the logistics that went into that, and Nationals was not announced. Was not announced soon enough. This is not enough notice, especially after Europe occurring so soon. I know it's potentially even worse for some other people who have it on that first weekend of September. But yeah, it's unfortunate. So I have to sort of reevaluate and figure out what my capabilities will look like for U.S. Nationals. I might not be playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, that's something that I do want to discuss more in depth, is kind of because we've got a few more events to come this year, some more announcements, even to the point where we've got Battle Hardens for October. I know this weekend we've got Los Angeles and Toronto happening, and then we do also have in October Minneapolis and Denver, so 2 more Battle Hardens. I think with these events, obviously, we kind of similar time. Actually, we get longer lead time information for the Battle Hardens, but if you are in those areas, you can go and check out those Battle Hardens. I'm not sure the formats for those. I think might be class constructed for both of them, but you can go and check that out on fabtcg.com. As I say, all right, Brendan, any updates on the Flesh and Blood Fitness Challenge, the Wellness Challenge for July?
Nearly halfway, chugging along. The Arsenal Pass Patreon has been incredible. The amount of communication and sort of just the community that's going on inside that Discord for the Fab Fitness Challenge is ridiculous. It's kept up a lot of steam as we head into week 2 here, which is incredible. We've had calls together, which we'll be doing more of. I think we'll have another one this week. We'll just hop on, talk about sort of what we're doing, our goals, what's challenging, and then just like, I don't know, kind of just hang out and talk. We were in there for about like an hour and a half. Was like 5-6 days ago. It was really cool. But yeah, it's been great so far. We're reaching sort of this pinnacle point, right? About halfway. This is when it should feel the worst, and motivation should wane. And anybody who's making it through right now is going to have a pretty easy time finishing, in my opinion. But it's been great.
Yeah, and hearing around the community as well, a lot of other discords for some of the content creators who have jumped on board. I know Flake with Instant Speed, Tech Action Podcast with Taylor and Isaac, a lot of sort of community spirit and support going on within those sort of discords as well, which is awesome to hear. And of course on Twitter. So yeah, good stuff, Brendan. It seems to be going really well, and obviously some real big changes for some, and yeah, just the support people are giving and I guess receiving has been awesome to see. Do want to give a bit of a Patreon call out. A big thanks to all of our patrons as always. Thank you for everything you let us do. We do have a Viscerai deck tech that went up last week in a sideboard guide for apparently a controversial Belittle Minnowism Viscerai deck, which is dividing some of the community, which is great to see. Love to see it and be involved in some of the discourse. Of course, we do also have our monthly pods up there. We do additional content there, and we sometimes from time to time do VOD reviews, etc. as well. And Brendan, I know you've got a couple of deck techs coming up as well with some community superstars and some sideboard guides that I think will be attached to those guides as per usual. As those deck techs as per usual.
Yeah, so I have one with Tarek this week, and then the next guest is to be announced. He will write us an additional piece for Patreon. So if you are a part of the Arsenal Pass Patreon, you will get to see, that sideboard guide, and that's going to be a little bit of just general deck tips on there as well.
The deck guide, right? Sideboard guide, deck guide.
Sideboard guide, deck tips, on and on. So yeah, it's gonna be a Tarek. We're gonna be doing Fi, and I will also be playing Fi against Hayden in a gameplay this week. I think we're gonna try to knock out Briar as well. I just want to mention real quick, because on the note of that, you're gonna be playing Viscerai against me, but I've actually locked my deck for Worlds. It's actually a Viscerai deck without Belittle Minnowism. So I have to thank you for getting everybody on that card. But the truth is the real Viscerai deck just doesn't run now. Obviously, all jokes. We've had some funny feedback and funny divide and some good memes going around.
Love it. I'm always loving to see it. It's been some good banter, even on the Flesh and Blood fan page on Facebook. Do just last sort of a couple of things to talk about in the news. We have a playmat giveaway. So I was given a couple of playmats by one of my favorite stores in New Zealand, Dice Jar Games down in Dunedin, who run amazing community events. They've provided me with a couple of these really cool Lexi playmats. I don't have it with me actually, but if you want to win one of those, and I'll post a picture up on Twitter or something so you can see it. If you want to win one of those and some heralds, some extended art heralds, then I want to hear your Flesh and Blood hot takes. Actually, me and Brendan both want to hear them. So drop in the comments after you hear this episode in the YouTube comments. Give us one of your sort of Flesh and Blood hot takes, maybe for the future, or things that you think about the game. And I'm gonna read out my favorite next week and send that out to you. And then two more things. I have a question for you, Brendan. Before that, I just want to give a quick shout out to Fabled Academy. I see that we're coming up in an upcoming feature from Fabled Academy, Brendan, that's coming up. And if you haven't already, go check out Fabled Academy, what Alex does. And there's a really cool interview with Pro Tour #1 winner, Pablo Pintor. But Brendan, before we leave the news and head into the Commander Cookout, I've got my own question for you. What are your thoughts on Shredgate? It's all the talk in the community, Brendan.
On what?
On Shredgate, on the golden tunic shredding on Shredgate.
Shredgate. Oh, yeah. I guess I'm just not hip with the kids. I didn't get that, but I did see the video. What do I think about it?
That's my point. I'm coining that term.
Yeah. I love how you thought I would just pick that up. Well, I thought they already did that, to be fair, because I remember when Sasha won his tunic back in like 2019, they sent him a bunch of shredded tunics. There's a video on Facebook and stuff. So I actually thought they'd all been shredded, but I guess this is another confirmation and show to the public that tunics are done. Well, I thought they were done already, so maybe they're just lowering in supply further. I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, it's good. They said it was going to be the last time they gave out tunics. They're shredding all the tunics. Seems pretty congruent, but I saw some funny memes on Twitter, but I think some people are a bit spiced up about this.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of a divide. I think, to my understanding, right, is the packing peanuts sort of box opening that Sasha got back in the day was, I think, all the remaining tunics that they hadn't planned to give out. I think a lot of things changed in terms of obviously event structure and callings that could happen, and then so they announced that they were going to obviously have the transition with the Crown of Providence coming in, and tunics. The last tunic to be given out was at I guess it was the calling in Taiwan, right? I guess it was, or New Jersey. So there was that, and then I guess they had some left over as what was meant to be kind of happening through that period. But they've stuck to the word. They've gotten rid of those, as they said, and they posted a bit of a, I guess, a tongue-in-cheek video about it. Obviously, that kind of led to some interesting feedback from mostly people involved in other communities, I think, is my understanding from what I saw on Twitter. Another game that we won't talk about, but I think that kind of ruffled some feathers, and there was a bit of, I guess, friction between certain groups of communities, whether it be in Flesh and Blood, between Flesh and Blood, into communities, things like that. So, yeah, it was just interesting to see. I think, look, I just wanted to kind of ask your take, and I guess you kind of have a similar take to me, is that Flesh and Blood and LSS said they would always do this, that they would stick to this printing policy of these promotional winner and top 8, I guess, gold foils, and that's what they've done. And I think it has nothing to do with scarcity of tunics or anything like that. This is a prize winning card, right? So I will say, I will preach a bit of kindness and understanding, maybe for communities that don't understand this. If you see a card like tunic and you see people shredding it, and it can maybe lead to some questions, but that's where we can help educate some people and just let them know what these cards actually were, or whatever it might be. And yeah, I think it's just funny, to be honest.
People thought they were lowering the available supply for players with gold tunics.
Which is definitely not happening. It's not. It was always scheduled to be those, and it has nothing to do with the tunics that you play with on a regular basis. But yeah, I just thought if people hadn't seen it already, it's been an interesting discourse. Maybe people aren't connected to the Flesh and Blood Twitter and wanted to know about this kind of Shredgate, as I'm coining it, Brendan. And I've probably stolen that name from someone else. I probably saw it subconsciously on Twitter, so if I stole it from you, I apologize. But anyway, come on, a cookout. Come on.
Yeah, Commander Cookout. I mean, speaking of the spice, let's throw it on the Barbie. Let's get that sear going. And Hayden, I know you've got a good question this week. Might be a bit of a hard one though.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. Comes from Matt Murdoch 84, the Daredevil himself, apparently, on our Discord. And Matt says, I'd like to know in a general sense, what it takes to seriously compete in Flesh and Blood. Many like myself have kids and other hobbies, but want to succeed at a competitive level. What kind of tactics and or time sink should be expected to elevate one's game? What is your team and community doing on a weekly basis to stay competitive nationally? A loose testing / training schedule would be great. This is it's not the easiest question to answer, right? And I thought about this, Brendan. Actually, I went away and you were going to answer this on the Commander Cookout, and I wanted to make some sort of pointed notes about this and just really give some honest answers about this, because I think people really want to know this kind of question. It's a question that always comes up, right? And I think the answer is not the same for any one person, but I thought Matt's asked pretty pointedly about what we do. So my first thing I want to answer is, and because I didn't give time to Brendan to answer this question, so I'll talk a little bit and then let Brendan sort of riff off that. But in the sense of what it takes to seriously compete in Flesh and Blood, the first thing I'll say, in all honesty, is it does take some raw talent, I think. Some understanding of TCGs at a deeper level and understanding of the fundamentals of Flesh and Blood at a deeper level. And I think you can see this with some of the players that have come through, is that they might not be able to articulate to you the fundamentals of Flesh and Blood, but they do understand it. And I think you can make up for raw talent. You can make up for it with a lot of hard work to learn these fundamentals, to really ingrain these in the way you think. It does take a lot of time, and I think you have to understand where you sit on that kind of, do I just have this raw talent and understanding, or do I need to work even harder for it? And that's really you talked about time sinks, Matt. That's really going to dictate the time that you need to spend. Kind of my other note as well is that when it comes to time, you got to use your time as efficiently as possible that you set aside for the game. Really focus testing, choosing what events are going to give you the biggest return to play. If you want to be competitive and you really want to excel your game, the sad reality, I guess it's sad, I wouldn't say it's sad, I think, because you can still make time for these things, but a reality is that armories probably aren't the best use of your time to level up your game, to be honest. If you're trying to get to that ultra competitive level, armories are a great place to run games, to interact with the community, to spend time playing some awesome and fun and amazing games and formats. But in terms of, I guess, best use of time, an armory probably realistically isn't going to be that, because you play 3 rounds of Class Constructed in a 3.5 hour time space that you could probably play in 60 to 90 minutes with say a testing partner or something. So it is important to, I think, recognize the time spent and where you're using that time. For me personally, I still want to play armories because I find them a lot of fun, but they're not where I'm getting in my testing and my games. And I know Brendan's the same. What we do, just quickly, Brendan, as well. So how do we kind of, Matt said, how do we, I guess, stay at the kind of cutting edge? How do we do it as a team community on a weekly basis to stay competitive? We share a lot of info, so a lot of discussions and kind of back and forth messages about things we're finding to share that info with each other. And there's not necessarily a big group with us, but we'll also share between people. I talk to a lot of people about the game, just casually, friends or acquaintances, people I've met through the game, people in our community, and that also gives me a lot of information. We discuss, of course, we play focus games, like I said, testing to find things out specifically. And this is probably the biggest takeaway that I can give, is that anytime I sit down for testing, so you talk about time spent, I probably spend less than 8 hours a week playing Flesh and Blood, but when I sit down with whoever I'm testing with, usually with Damakai, we have a question to answer. We come in for an hour session on an evening, hour and a half, whatever it is, and we have a question to answer. We have 2 questions to answer, and we can run 3, 5, 6 games pretty quickly and try and answer these questions pointedly and directly, and that gives us a lot of information. You can always take advantage of, I guess, learning something from that, which is really important. That may be my biggest takeaway. And then, yeah, that's probably the main ones for me, Brendan, the kind of things I wanted to write down in answer to Matt's question. I think the way you spend your time is just so important if you want to sort of advance to that high level of competitive play.
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I would have answered this question initially is just like, it depends. Depends where you're.
I did say that. I did say at the start. It depends on each individual.
Yeah, it depends like what you mean by competitive and how good you're trying to be. I think to be competitive, that's a very, very attainable achievement. To be the world champion, less so, right? I think in a game like Flesh and Blood, and probably in most games, it's not going to happen by accident. And a lot of it really boils down to hard work, which also a key variable in that equation is time. So we test, like Ken said, we do have pretty strict testing. It's regimented testing. It's not that much, at least during these sort of lull periods. It'll be like 1 hour a day, maybe take weekends off. And then once we get closer to the event, we'll ramp up and do, the 10 to 14 hour days, which is honestly not by design. It just happens to be like that because we end up sort of flustering to break the meta or just kind of reinvent the wheel a million times. So on time wise, I think it's not crazy. It's hard to implement if you have a normal life. I think even 1 hour a night can be pretty tough. But the way we go about testing is really important. It's very focused. There's a question, and we genuinely don't do it to have fun. Like a lot of things that can creep up in these testing sessions and things like that is like people can be playing to win. They can just be kind of tuned out while they're playing, right? They might be playing the gauntlet deck. They might be playing something straightforward and you're testing the brews into it. I think it's really important that everybody in the group is sort of participating with 100% because that's how you're going to get things out of it. In terms of sharing information, we do have like a Discord where we'll share information, but honestly, that's not even where most of our stuff goes. We actually started implementing like strategy calls where we'll get on with the entire team. We try to do like once a week, at least when we start to get about 1 month out, and actually talk it over so we don't have incongruent perceptions about the meta, which happened a lot in the past. So this is what we implemented to fix that. So that's it for us. It is work, to be honest. There's a lot of times that testing rolls around. I don't want to be testing. I want to be doing something else. And it's just what I do. Like I'm there, I show up, and we get it done. And we just do that every single day. And that's sort of, I don't know. I assume that if I put in that work and if I maintain my schedule and maintain discipline and I surround myself with extremely talented players, which I think is like a massive part of it, like way bigger than creating a regimented schedule like this. If you want to find people that can elevate you and help you get better, but if you get all those things together, I think that through these processes, if you trust them, pretty much anything is attainable.
Yeah, I'm actually a good point. I didn't have that one down in my notes, but I do agree. It's like not only is it the focus testing time, it's the players that I guess you're using that with. And playing to win is not a thing in testing, right? Like you're playing to find out answers. You're not playing to win. I think that's such a good call out. It's not even about playing perfectly during testing. It's about using them and maximizing your time. If you spend 15% extra, 20% extra on, a play every second turn to try and maximize things, sometimes that might be justifiable for trying to find out optimal lines of play. But often when you're trying to discover and answer certain questions that have nothing to do with sequencing or certain parts of that matchup, that's just a kind of waste of time. So it's a really good call out, actually, Brendan. I hadn't really thought about that one. But yeah, like you say, it's going to depend. We both kind of gave perspectives from our point of view. And I thought about just lastly as well, maybe Matt, depending on what your goals are personally, if it's winning a road to nationals, it's qualifying for nationals, it's winning a pro quest to make it to the pro tour. I do think, like Brendan says, the time spent is maybe not as much. You might not spend as much time, but you do still need to do these things, I think, where you really focus your time and efforts, because you want to spend less time than the people, the players next to you that you're playing at these events, or players across from you, but make the most of it and sort of gain the biggest advantage you can with, I guess, the least amount of investment possible. And that is kind of, I guess, a lot of the ethos of what TCG players at competitive levels will try and do.
Yeah. And there's one thing in terms of time is that it's the reason that we can do that, the reason why we can do the 1 hour a day, which is actually it's a lot, I think, compared to other testing groups, is because we already spent the time. Like there is, if you're starting from 0 or a very kind of base level, there is going to be a lot of upfront learning, and then you can get to sort of a maintenance phase where you know sort of what your macro plans are on how to attack a format, and you implement processes and you trust those processes and you just let them run their course. But yeah, in the beginning, it's there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. Yeah, like you trust as well the information coming at you. If you say something or Dan says something, then I'm probably most of the time going to take it as gospel, because there's the trust there that the process that we're all using is the same process. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Brendan, great question from Matt Murdoch 84 on our Discord. Thank you. If you do want to get your questions in, you can get them in on our community Discord. You can also drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it's a Command and Cookout question. You can send them to us on Twitter, DM us, however you want to get them in. Please do so. Give them to Brendan at Road to Nationals this weekend in Oklahoma or in Dallas. And we thank you for your questions. You can also email them to us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. And of course, just a quick reminder about the giveaway for next week for your hot takes before we get into the main topic, which is Flesh and Blood hot takes from your Arsenal Pass hosts, myself, Hayden, and Brendan. I think we've got a few each. As I say, we've come in blind with these, but I think we just start with the one that is going to be overlap, Brendan, because we already kind of talked about it at the top of the show in the news. I'll share my kind of, I guess, my statement or my take, I guess, and then I want to hear yours. Is it slightly different to mine? And then let's have a conversation about it. Let's dig into it. So mine starts with LSS need to take a better approach to scheduling. I know it's been COVID times, and especially this first 6 months of this year has been super impacted by delays and things trickling over from last year. But a lot of people will not be playing in the Nationals this year because dates haven't yet been announced, or they've only just been announced. And we're 5 weeks out from people traveling to Lille to play in the Pro Tour. I know a lot of people are booked, and having an 11 to 12 day gap between the end of Pro Tour Lille and the start of Nationals is just going to be absolutely crazy, and on such short notice, people have already booked trips. If LSS want the game to grow and players to be able to, I guess, compete and schedule these events and be at these events and the best players, and even just make the most of these events, they need to do a better job of the scheduling. And I think the first point for me that starts with is announcing the first half of next year's events before the end of the year, and in fact, as soon as possible. I think to make these decisions that players need to make, especially when, let's be honest, the support and people aren't making money from playing these games competitively, right? Like they might make a bit of money here and there, but you've got to win or make a finals or a top 4 of a Pro Tour to be able to make money. People are doing this for the passion and the love, and we need a bit more scheduling information on LSS's side to make this a reality.
Hard to take it serious when they do this. It's unprofessional, kind of, period. There's not much more to that. We do need much more notice if possible. But is it going to affect the bottom line of players, Flesh and Blood? I don't know. It's all going to be sort of a secondary or tertiary effect from the potential consequence of this, which is that your professional play and the players that participate in that cannot do so effectively, right? And they start to lose interest, and it just kind of becomes a joke, which is not what they want. You're going to pour in all this money, all this design, and a lot of and planning into this this OP system, but then you're gonna do like less than 8 weeks or less than 9 week sort of announcements on major things like nationals, and it's tough. Like, we didn't even have the venue or the area in France for the Pro Tour for the longest time. It's really, really tough. And then you couple that with economic factors as well, which is like flight prices are rising kind of drastically. And if you're not able to book in advance, it gets really expensive. So I understand that it's easier on the studio to tell us later rather than tell us earlier. And there's a lot that goes into that, and you're right. We probably don't fully understand. Doesn't matter to an extent, right? Like, we need, like, I'm telling you, and Hayden's telling you, we need this. We need better scheduling. For someone like me, right? I have a schedule which allows me to travel like that. I can sort of flexibly move around my work hours. Like, I have a very idyllic lifestyle for this kind of stuff. Even I'm struggling now. I can't imagine for people that have normal 9-to-5s, dependents, like families, and just et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's so tough, man. It obviously needs to change. No one is in favor of the current system versus the potential other system, which would be more notice, more advanced. So the ball's really in Legend Story Studios' court to fix this. And I think it's really important. And if they want their OP system and their professional play system to be taken seriously, it needs to be done now.
Yeah, it's integrity, I think, is where it comes down to. And look, I wanted to start with some pretty harsh words. I think we're generally pretty positive. We've talked about this issue before, and we've given the benefit of the doubt to Legend Story Studios. And let's weigh up the flip side of it, right? The studio's been dealing with so many disruptions, contract things with venues, with trying to schedule these events to make it possible to, the point where, to be honest, with a lot of national venues, they might not even be confirmed at this stage, right? With the vendors that they're using to run these events. And completely understand that, right? And I do want to put that side of the conversation out there so that people do understand. But I'm going to be pretty blunt about it, I think, at this point. And, we're not often that critical. This needs to change for next year. The integrity of the event structure, the ability to motivate and give people the ability to, like Brendan says, people that have other commitments, other obligations. Let's be honest, there is very few, if any, people or players out there playing this game full time. It's just not serviceable at this stage, right? We're not at a level where, say, Magic the Gathering was in their, the heydays of their Pro Tour, or other games out there, esports, etc. So I think that needs to massively come into consideration, that this is a hobby for most people, but one that they want to play competitively, want to be the best in the world, and want to be at these events. Even if people don't want to be the best in the world, they want to be at these events. People want to go there to experience what it's like to be at a calling, to be at a Pro Tour, to enjoy the atmosphere, to see, the artists, to see the cosplayers, to see all these different things that are happening at these events as well. And realistically, on the current time frame we're working on, it's really difficult, especially when you've got to hop around the world to get to events, within 11, 12, 13 days of each other. It's pretty crazy. So where we stand right now, we don't even have confirmed dates for a lot of national championships, but we do know a lot of national championships, or at least some, are going to be happening less than 2 weeks after Pro Tour Lille, which is going to mean that, unfortunately, people aren't going to be able to play in some of these national championships. Either they're not going to be in country because either they've taken an extra week or two post their trip in Lille, which rightfully so, make the most of it. You don't want to do it before the Pro Tour when you're preparing. Probably want to do it afterwards. Makes sense. I know I'm doing that personally. Don't know where my national championship is going to be, but it's looking pretty dicey for me to play mine, unfortunately, is what it is, I guess. But then outside of that, just financial and, commitments. Okay, we're 2 weeks after Pro Tour Lille, we're back in country, and even if you're in Europe, right? Even if you're, say, within France, maybe potentially, I've got other commitments now at this stage because we're less than 7 weeks away from the start of nationals. Financially committing to another event so soon after is really difficult on such short notice. All these different things start to add up. So look, I think a lot of, it's probably something that I haven't seen talked about as much as I thought it would have been as the short notice. I know we've talked about it in the past. I know we've had some community members, especially well-known community members, be really outspoken about it. And I've kind of gone on the side of, hey, look, let's give Legend Story Studios the benefit of the doubt here to really work this out. But I think we need some communication from them now about where they expect lead times to be, even if it's just expectations. Like, what are the lead times they expect to have going into 2023 for organized play? because I think the players' expectations is that at minimum it needs to be more and it needs to be clearer and better. And I mean, that's the bare minimum. I think we need an announcement of calendars and seasons really to be able to do this properly.
Yeah. It's just this is one of those things where there's just not a lot of gray area to sort of my take on this. It just needs to change, needs to be fixed, and I think that everyone would actually benefit, despite how hard it is, because I know that if it doesn't change, the OP and the professional play of this game will suffer drastically, like drastically. I just, it's getting to a point where like even I might not be able to play. Like that's ridiculous. The amount, like I said, the schedule that I'm able to sort of work with to go to some of these events is just very atypical. And if they're giving me like, this much notice, like in Europe, like we talked about this at the top of the show, Hayden, I waited so freaking long to book those flights, and they're probably $800 more a piece expensive because I waited so long, and I still missed it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, look, last thing I want to say is, don't get me wrong, I'm super thrilled with what we have had this year in terms of organized play events. It's some of the best events I've been to. I've had the best time. I've really enjoyed myself. I'm loving playing Flesh and Blood and traveling to these events, and I'd love to do it next year. And what Legend Story Studios and the team there and the organized play team have built already, I can only congratulate them on what they've done. But a lot of work still to go, and I hope this can be taken as, I guess, feedback if the team does hear it, because like I say, great job so far, but a long way to go, I think, to make sure that we can continue to sustain what has already been built and build upon an amazing system that is coming through from Legend Story Studios. So with that said, Brendan, should we turn to something a little bit more positive? I'm not sure if you've got a take you want to go to next. Otherwise, I can spill something out that's maybe a little bit more positive, I guess, at least.
I have one that is. I want to hear your take first. It's a bit of a discussion. And
Sure.
I've been a little bit sort of far away from this, so it hasn't affected me. But I want to ask you as sort of like a retrospective. Was the change to ELO good? So that is ELO affecting Battle Hardens, Road to Nationals, and ProQuest. Was that a good change?
Yeah, my take is yes, it is a good change. I mean, it's still hard to say, right? Because we're still not in a time where we're using ELO, but it does seem like, teething issues aside in terms of, the time periods of them doing updates and things like that, it does seem like this is giving some sort of, I guess, this grassroots feel to these games and to these events, and giving people, incentive, I think, to show up and to try. You know what? I said yes. I'm going to say I'm unsure still, because I just thought about the positives, but then I also think about some negatives still, with maybe, players that don't need to be playing events playing them, but I guess they're discouraged from playing them. So it's really tough. I think more events that can generate and build this ELO system at an early stage should be a good thing in theory, because we need to get to a point where it matters and it becomes a consequence for event invitations, for showing us who consistently the best players are in the world. But callings and Pro Tours, end of the day, with the higher K values, are the ones that are going to shift the leaderboard significantly. What the lower events are going to do, like these 6K events and, was it 8K and 16K, these events at ProQuest, Road to Nationals level, what these are going to do is they're going to give some really good sort of like gauge for players who are trying to come up through the competitive ranks, I think, to to steal some ELO from some good players, to start to be, recognized in maybe their top 10, top 15 of their country. And I think that's a really good thing to see. So yeah, I'm I'm going to say, I think so far it's good. There's a few things around it, and I'll say I'm still a little unsure, but leaning towards the positive side.
Yeah, so the core question is, did the addition of ELO to these events elevate the experience, do nothing, or lessen it?
I think for some players it's elevated, and for others it's done nothing.
It seems like the vast majority it has done nothing. So that's what's interesting. But I haven't.
But there's no consequence yet, right?
Yeah, it depends who you talk to, and I haven't talked to enough people, so I'm actually interested to hear people's take on this. Is if it elevated the experience, did nothing, or if it lessened it. For me, and I haven't been affected by it, but it does seem like there are some issues. I don't think the company has the infrastructure to like support ELO changing this often, because they do this sort of batch updates. We've had a bunch of weird funky stuff. Maybe they'll sort out the kinks, but the system it seems like it wasn't really designed to be doing this. We had the last update went so far back, I can remember. So heavily lagged updates, and yeah, we'll see if that system can withstand, I don't know, this kind of volume in perpetuity, or if they fix it or whatever. But yeah, for me, it hasn't affected me much. I just thought it'd be interesting to go back and touch on it because it was a big change. Like, I thought that this was a huge change. When it happened, I was like, wow, that's massive. Not because the onesie twosies of ELO that might be getting a change. It's just like from an ideological perspective, right? ELO was exchanged at professional level events, right? Events that were curated by specific tournament organizers, these big events with, a certain type of judge, a judging structure, you have the head judge, et cetera, and like a very, very, very clear standard of quality control. And then when you extend that down, it sort of breaks that to an extent, and not in the sense that it makes the system not work, but it's a very different ideology. I think it's a big deviation, and that was something a lot of people didn't talk about, maybe because it doesn't matter, but it's a big change, I think, from where they were looking at ELO and its purpose when they originally ideated it. I don't think that was actually in the books. I think it came later. I think they figured they would put it in at a later time.
Maybe, but that's where K value comes into it, right? Which I think is a really important thing to take note of, is that K value, and they're allowed to adapt and change their sort of processes and ideologies, right? Which I think is a good thing. But my counter to that would be K value mitigates some of that. You talked about the kind of the curation and these high level events. Well, K value kind of plays into that, and also the introduction of competitive rules enforcement as so you have professional, now we have competitive for Road to Nationals, ProQuest, and day ones of callings, and then you have casual for armories and skirmish type level events. So anything that now has a K value attached to it for ELO changes in rating now comes into this competitive level or above. I think actually that is the best change we've seen, is the introduction of the competitive rules enforcement level, because having Road to Nationals, having ProQuest at a casual level made no sense. And I think LSS have taken that on board and made a really good change with the competitive rules enforcement level. And I feel comfortable that ELO can be attached to that at a lower value than it would be at a professional level event and still have some integrity. So I think that's a good thing. But until we actually see what this means, what ELO means, other than just a bit of bragging rights, it's really hard to say.
Yes.
And I do agree, though, that the time frames of updates is something that needs to be looked at, but I'm sure that's something that they're fully aware of it. They posted an article about it.
That's yeah. Sorry, yeah, I kind of lost my track there, but you said something pretty funny. But what will ELO be used for? Another kind of hot take that we won't dive into, but like, what the heck is this system that we've been kind of working with for so long? We'll see if it applies to Worlds. But yeah, the ELO has been a funky little thing that Flesh and Blood has done for the past 2 years. But maybe it will come into its adulthood here in 2023.
Adolescence. Yeah, I think probably the studio could have been a little bit more clearer about what they wanted to do with it. It's been a little bit kind of like secretive, what's happening. But James White has spoken about it a few times. He's been questioned about it, and his take, I believe, from the last interview he did with Flake, which is the last one I heard, where he talked about ELO, was it is something we want to use to show who the best players are in the world. It's something we want to use for future of, I guess, getting people to events as well. And I can't remember the exact wording he used, but basically it looks like we're going to get it for invites down the road. I don't even think Worlds is going to be the time. There's so many spare PTIs and stuff floating around. I think Nationals and PTIs is going to be the way that you qualify for Worlds. And then next year we see maybe a revamp to the invite system. I think, naturally XP needs to be done away with. So I think ELO is seems like to me the obvious answer to the long-term sort of invites and structure of how you get to events through ranking, not through XP.
Yeah, it's always funny when you put the adjective of obvious on something.
Yeah, I know.
It's like
obvious to me. Sorry.
A very contentious subject. It's like ELO. We should definitely get rid of ELO. It's obvious. Sorry, not ELO, but XP. While I completely agree with you, Hayden, I think that there's a lot of people listening to be like, "What do you mean? That drives armories and sales and et cetera, et cetera."
That's why it's a drop for me. I think XP is a great way to qualify for Nationals, don't get me wrong. Pro Tours, on the other hand. Anyway, not one of my hot takes for this time round. That wasn't that positive. But I do have something that I want to share with you next, Brendan, which is a take for me, is that I think Living Legend in a non-rotating format is genius. And I think we're starting to reap the rewards of this system and this format. We've had a lot of teething issues with Living Legend. We're not even at a perfect stage with Living Legend, do not get me wrong, and the way that, I guess, rotation, quote-unquote, is going to work in this game. But I think the system is genius, and I think the way that Legend Story Studios have built towards it finally after a few sort of hiccups is working really well. And I think the outcome of that is that we're seeing a really fresh meta, a really interesting meta game in Classic Constructed that's going to lead us through into, well, first of all, Road to National Season has been super interesting, but then we're also going to have the Pro Tour, these Battle Hardens, and something might change between then, sure. But what I'm seeing so far is really interests me. Also, the fact that Uprising isn't the biggest impact on this format so far. Yes, it's been good. It's been great to have this new set. We're seeing Fire come out. We're seeing Dromai really start to have a good week last week with people starting to figure out these decks. But the change in the rotation with the living legend of these heroes, Chain and Bravo, Star of the Show, leaving the format has been the biggest change, I think. And I think most people would agree with me on that. I think you'd agree with me on that, Brendan. And I think that is down to the living legend system finally starting to take impact and take shape.
Interesting. Super funny little anecdote there about Uprising. I think I told the story on a past pod where someone asked me what I thought about Legend Stories printing under like less powerful cards. I was like, no, I say that because it's not a broken hero. Like every single set we've had a broken hero. Yeah. So let's talk about this Living Legend Genius. I actually totally disagree. Well, I do think that we're in a good place right now, and I do think that the meta's in a good place. I think it's more happenstance. I think Living Legend is actually quite lazy and not thought out. It's very clearly seen through the static values that don't scale with the player base whatsoever. And I also think that regardless of being in a currently healthy meta, it's like very exciting, and who knows what the best deck is going to be. Like before now, Living Legend has sucked up until now. And
I
really,
didn't say it didn't, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, but you said it was ingenious. I don't think it's ingenious. I think it's actually not very. There's not a very good design behind it. It just happened to end up kind of good right now, paired with the release of Uprising and rotating out Bravo Star of the Show, who is kind of terrible for the game, and Chain, right? So because of that, I do think that it has happened to give us a nice meta. But ultimately, I do not like the system, and I do not think that there is very much intelligent design behind it. That's not an insult, by the way. I'm just saying I don't think it's fully thought out. And I don't think that this is the system that we're going to have for the future forever. Maybe they'll change the value so that they're dynamic, but even then, I'm just skeptical.
You don't think we'll have Living Legend down the road? You think Living Legend will?
I do think we will. I just think it'll be different, right? I think it will be different.
But,
and at the very least, they're going to have to adjust how it happens, right? Because it doesn't work. Like,
completely agree.
Players go up, players go down. The system breaks both ways, right? That's the thing about static values. It's like less people play the game, things don't Living Legend. More people play the game, things Living Legend too fast.
I thought I was quite clear about that. I don't think the system itself, the way they've done. I said there's been a lot of hiccups and teething issues in the system. I think that the way it's being enacted in terms of the system itself, I don't think is, there's a lot of work to be still done there. We've talked about this before. I agree. It should be done. I think it should be done on a points-based system for the total season, where you get percentages assigned to those at the end, basically to always ensure that you have a pretty consistent rate of Living Legend points being assigned totally, whether that depends on the scale or the spread between heroes depending on how they perform, then that's what you want. But a general kind of consistent level of numbers. And I think they're going to have to, they did mention that in an article that, in terms of that mind to be looked at. But what I'm saying is this having Living Legend, having heroes reach Living Legend and a non-rotating format, I think is the core of it. And I think we're starting to see why that is such a good design ethos. But I can see if you disagree, then it's fine.
Yes. So the crux of my disagreement was with your use of ingenious. Like it was a system designed to give us this meta, and I think that system has consistently kind of failed us. It looks like it will fail us in the future, and it has, by happenstance, created a perfect storm where we now have what looks to be an open and a healthy meta where there's not an overly dominant deck. But I don't think that's a result of this being like an ingenious system, right? I think that it was
I don't think the system is ingenious. I think the design element of using Living Legend in a non-rotating format in this game is kind of the genius part of it. And I think we're starting to see why that is going to work so well in the future. Yes, the system itself and the way that it's enacted needs some work and will have to be, because like you say, scaling and descaling of players impacts that massively, as well as events, especially for Blitz actually with skirmish season. But in terms of the actual ethos and design itself, I think it's fantastic. And I think we're already seeing why it can be fantastic. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Sure. All right. So my next one is, I guess we can go positive since we've been.
I'm waiting for you to go positive.
or we could go negative. No, I say yeah. So I have one here. It's just like the Flesh and Blood community is really incredible, and I'm actually surprised that it's maintained its purity for so long. I thought that potentially as more people entered the game that we would kind of degenerate, specifically on social media platforms like Twitter, but it's ridiculous. I actually feel like the community has gotten better, and in the beginning there was a lot of we had some loud voices that were overly negative and just wouldn't really give constructive feedback, and it felt very loud. Nowadays I almost don't hear it at all. I think that there's almost like a lack of critique sometimes when we talk about like,
when it comes out of your own mouth.
Yeah, the Nationals dates and things like that. It's like, oh, there's like, I'm surprised I haven't seen people talking about like that. Am I the only one affected? So yeah, the community is really awesome. I think that people are super positive. Like, it does actually feel like a community, especially on Twitter. Like, Fab Twitter is just incredible. Great way to connect if you're not on there yet. But yeah, like I'm really surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised, and I think that it's going to maintain for the future. Forever? I don't know, but I think we've gotten over that hump, right? We had a great community to start out. We got a bunch of new players, and then rather it becoming negative, it just sort of matured a bit and stayed the same awesome community that we've had since the beginning. So I don't know. I'm just really proud. It makes me happy to play this game. Like, I've had great experiences. Like, the social experience of Flesh and Blood has started to, I mean, I think that's honestly why I play the game at this point. It's totally changed my life.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I definitely agree with that. The community's been amazing. The experience at events because of the community is amazing. Like, purely, like, the game is fantastic, obviously, but what builds up and everything around it is the community. I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, Brendan, on this, is that I do have a little bit of a fear and a worry that we've, as a community, shunned out some constructive criticism a little bit too hard. And what I mean by this is I think there is a really big difference between constructive criticism and destructive criticism, which, feedback effectively versus just pure criticism, which we've kind of seen, I think, and the community's done a good job of recognizing that and rewarding those for, I think, having thoughts that are going to help the long term of the game, the community. But I do agree with you. Like you said at the start a little bit, when we're seeing less and less of that, right? And I hope that we don't. It's not because we're shunning those people who have good views. And I think of someone, I'm just going to give it, I hope they don't mind me naming them, but I think of someone as like D-Rude, right, who has, I think, some really strong takes on the game, some that I disagree with, some that I agree with, but I think the way that that he approaches sharing his feelings and ideas on the game is like a really good way to do it. He's not attacking anyone, he's just stating the way he feels about things, and I think that's a good thing, and I hope we continue to get that kind of feedback and those sort of feedback loops from the community. But I do agree, like the stuff that we had at the start, where it just wasn't healthy, is gone away, which is, I think, a good thing. But I would like to see, like you say, that constructive criticism stay around and the feedback loops be there.
Well, worst case scenario, we'll be here just to dunk on them in the news
Brendan's
section.
here, don't worry, guys. All right. No, that's a good one. I think shout out to the Flesh and Blood community. You guys are amazing. Shout out to the Arsenal Pass community as well. You're all amazing. All right. My next take is, I got a two-parter for you. Sealed Flesh and Blood sucks.
Now it does.
Yeah, I really like Welcome to Rathe Sealed. The last few sets have not been good from a Sealed perspective, I think. And Legend Story Studios have kind of abandoned it a little bit, to me it seems. And I think you can see this through how they're pushing draft events, which I think is a great solution to be able to make sure that the limited game is there and is lively, but we don't have to suffer through a sealed format. That isn't the best, unfortunately. But I do think my second part of this is that I think limited will become the most important part of growing Flesh and Blood at an entry level to both a kind of semi-casual, semi-competitive, and competitive level of play. And this will require work from Legend Story Studios on balancing the sealed gameplay of their sets, because I don't think you can continue to easily, like, I'm the draft implementation, drafted events, skirmishes, road to national stuff is fantastic, but sealed is also more accessible by nature, right? You don't have to sit there and know the cards, have time pressure, have all this. You can sit there, build a sealed pool, change it around, try it like you would at a pre-release, and I think that gives a lot of opportunities for this entry level and sort of like entry into competitive level play. I think sealed is a really important aspect of limited, and it's one that we can't really utilize right now, unfortunately, with the past two sets. I personally, I think, not being good sealed formats. So I think there's some work to do there. But yeah, I really do believe that limited is kind of the way forward. I think draft is freaking phenomenal in this game. And I hope, all I kind of hope now is that I guess the team can translate some of that into the sealed experience, maybe balance that out a little bit. And then I think you've got this fully fleshed out, really amazing limited format that's going to drive the growth of the game. I mean, limited, selling product, having limited events, introducing players to new sets, they get the cards through the sets. There's so many, I'm not going to list them all, but there's so many positives to limited formats and gameplay. And when you have a really good draft format like we do, plus a good seal format, which I think we don't have, you have this really kind of great ecosystem and harmony between the format and the set that releases. And I think that we really need that going forward to drive this game.
It's a lot to unpack there. First one is Sealed Sucks, Hayden Dale, 2022. The
current format suck. Give me Welcome to Rathe. I'll play some Sealed Welcome to Rathe. So whatever, it's fine.
I slightly disagree with you. I think that the most recent sets have lacked a certain level of competitive integrity that I would have preferred. But the only set in Flesh and Blood that I think is worthy of that word suck is Arcane Rising sealed. The old frickin' Runeblade pile fatigue. It's so bad. These sets, they're annoying. It definitely felt a bit forced Briary in Tales of Aria. And then we come to this format. Does it feel a bit forced-fi? Yeah, I guess. The decks also, they seem, I don't know. It's just a little uninteresting to play things like Icelander sometimes, I feel like, in Sealed, because, either you get the resource base and the blues that you need, or you don't, and, this Fi is just way easier to play than some of the other heroes. So I think that the competitive integrity of Sealed is not where I would want it to be. I like there to be more depth. Do I think that, newer players and casual players could pick up Uprising and have fun in Sealed? I think so. I don't think there's infinite depth to it, but I think so. Can they pick up Arcane Rising and have fun? It would be a struggle if they listened to the Session Blood podcast about how to put freaking 40 or so cards into your Runeblade deck and fatigue your opponent.
I remember that.
It would be a struggle. So I agree with you, but not quite to the level of suck on the casual base. I want to follow up with this, Hayden, though. Would you be willing to give away some of your draft happiness for Sealed happiness? Would you give away percentage points of, what you think of the draft?
Yep, definitely. Because I think the draft format is phenomenal in Flesh and Blood. I think it works so well. I've loved the last two sets in terms of the 3-hero balance. I think Uprising is actually, is for people who are trying to get into draft, a great format for that, because the depth there's still depth there, but there's a lot of surface level that you can really take away with the draft format, I think. And, you can learn a lot of sort of rules and create some as you like to say, Brendan, some heuristics pretty quickly with this format. So I think that's really cool, but I would give away a bit of that. I mean, I would love us to, don't get me wrong, I think the depth of this format is not as much as Tales of Aria, but sort of the draft aspect of it is maybe a bit nicer. But I'd love to get back to some Sealed. And you know what? I'll stick by my statement of it sucks, and you can take that whatever way you want to take it. What we are going to get, though, Brendan, is we're going to get to, I guess, put what you just said to the test, is we're going to have a skirmish season which involves Sealed. So we're going to get some community reaction. We're going to see how that plays out post pre-release with returning to Sealed and Uprising.
Yeah. Interesting point too. The upcoming skirmish season. We'll might talk about this one later, but I do have a point about this just the evolution of Flesh and Blood competitive events and how we've gone from skirmish being the premier to then Route to Nationals to callings, and you've sort of seen this I've seen significantly less participation in each event as a higher tier one has come, and the professional scene has been more fully fleshed out, but that could just be my region. So I'm interested to see how much, what skirmish looks like. Maybe it's just more healthy, right? Maybe 50 people or 30 people for a skirmish isn't healthy, and maybe it should be more around 20 players. But there's one other thing I want to talk about there. You said that Sealed and Limited is important for the game's sort of success in player acquisition, especially on the casual side. I do agree with you. Unless they figure out what the heck they're trying to do with UPF and make that format fun so that we can have a Commander-esque format. I don't know.
Still think Limited is important anyway.
It is. But yeah. I think there's only way that statement becomes wrong, and that's if there is this, Commander level casual format that people are really interested. But outside of that, yes, I do not think that Classic Constructed is a great introduction to Flesh and Blood.
Listen, correct, maybe, is what you mean. No, I think it's interesting. Anyway, Brendan, have you got anything for me?
Yeah, so let's look down here. This one is a bit more philosophical. So I said collecting is cool, but eventually your cards just become a burden as you get more and more. Do you, Hayden Dale, still enjoy your collection? Do you enjoy owning all the cards, or has it become a hassle?
There's two very different. You've thrown out a very big statement, and you've asked me a question that I don't think has relevance to it. To be honest, because I'm not a collector. That's why I think I don't have relevance. I'm not a collector. I've held on to a lot of cards because partly because I'm lazy and I didn't want to move stuff or
Yeah,
shift
yeah.
stuff. Uh, Partly sentimental. I think even though I'm not a collector of like the cold foils, so the cold foil legendaries I've held on to. I wanted to keep those. And a little bit, there was a financial incentive. I think a little bit initially. I think that's gone away as collecting in this game is obviously. I mean, collecting in TCGs and CCGs and just this whole kind of collectible market has obviously gone down. Which makes sense, post COVID. Um, but yeah, do I find it a burden? Do I still enjoy it? Look, I like having all the cards for each set because I like to be able to play whatever I want whenever I want. So I want to always have the full set. But you know what? I don't bother with foils. I don't bother with the EAs and all that kind of stuff. The ones that open, I will generally keep. But that goes back to my first principle, which is I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to liquidating sort of collectibles. So you should see the amount of mats I have in my wardrobe, Brendan.
Oof,
But
God,
yeah,
don't even get me started.
but
Hundreds.
a good question, right? Like I think the one thing I will say in a positive element compared to some other games is the set releases and the amount of product coming out is quite light compared to a lot of other games. I think that's really good for collecting. It makes it a lot easier, a lot more attainable. There's less crazy, variations of different cards. Now you open one set, not unlimited, and first edition I think is good for that as well. So
Mm.
overall, I think it might be for me personally, maybe it doesn't even become a burden to be honest. And I think collecting overall, I think I'm kind of happy with how it is in this game. I don't know. You'd have to talk to a collector to be honest.
Yeah, I I think I lost my joy in collecting. I got a critical maximum of cards, and now it's a lot of work to keep it all organized and
That's true.
accessible so that we can now use them for gameplay and use them for tournament and things like that. But the nail in the coffin for me, and people could disagree with me, I could be wrong, could be misguided, but this is actually what did it for me. All of the DQs as a result of marked cards and foils, whether they're cold foils or regular foils, has made me have almost no interest in owning anything that is cool, pretty, or unique. Because I don't really play too many armories. I'm in a not a great area for it. I have a lot around me, but they're 30 to 45 minutes away, and it's just a long process, and I don't really have time for it at this point. So the foils that I could have, like I'd have to have my deck completely foiled. I can't I can't do the thing where like I have some white borders in there just to kind of piss people off. Like it's that did it for me. Like now I just have to go. I have to actually actively go buy the regular versions and not put these more premium versions of cards in my deck. I know that it is solved if you have all foils, something like that, but I just think it kind of sucks. Like we've seen so many DQs recently with this. Like even where I was getting proxies for my sealed decks and stuff like that. That did it
Yeah.
for me. But on top of that, it's just like it's a thing. Like the things you own start to own you. Like it's taking up so much space. It's such an effort, and yeah, I don't know. It's just I wanted to have that combo with you, Hayden, because I didn't know if you were a collector or not, and it's interesting for me going through this metamorphosis and this process of really liking my shiny cards, and then now they just take up space.
Yeah, I mean, I guess cold foils is maybe a little bit different to rainbow foils because of you don't get the warping right. So that's interesting in that. I also want to point out that we've recently, at the end of June, had a policy change when it comes to foils and what that means from a penalty guideline standpoint. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, if penalties are still need to be handing out for people playing foils because they look too different, that's an issue with printing, I think, as well. But I do just want to point out that there's been changes in that
Yeah,
to the
no
point of
DQs, just game losses.
yeah, exactly. But which is still, yeah, from a
Sucks.
competitive
Yeah.
integrity, exactly. I agree. That's why I just want to point it out. I'm not using that as a kind of, I guess, a point of saying it's a good thing. But yeah, I do. That is a bit of concern for me. I never play with foils in any game, basically for that reason. The one I actually played with foils at the Pro Tour, but that's because I didn't know I was going to be playing Kano, and that's what I had available to me was
Mhm.
was a half foil deck. I didn't get a deck check at the event, but I actually did have a judge look at my deck because I was like worried about it, and they said no issue. There was no kind of uniformity to patterns that could be pulled out in my deck. My foils were all pretty flat. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a bit of a concern if you're a competitive player, but you also like pretty things, right? I will say, I do think they still look amazing. The marbles from the set look fantastic. They're cool, they're cold foil. Maybe that does address some of the issue of playing foils and non-foils. Maybe double sleeving helps you in some regard. There's so many different things. But I think if you're into collecting and you like cool things and you like playing with pretty things at whatever level of play, maybe not the highest level competitive play, I think that's still accessible and available to you. And I don't know, I do think that the change from the first edition unlimited split has been a good thing for collecting.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. Very good. Very good.
Hard one.
You said you said it at the sort of at the beginning we started talking about this. You said now you don't have to open 2 products. You're opening it's much better. It's like so much better. It's a great change. We don't talk a lot about it because we're less interested in that side of the game inherently, but yeah, I think that's been a great change. Cool. 2.0.
Yeah. I love having these marbles sitting in my folder. They look awesome. I'm not playing with them, but they look cool.
Yeah.
All right, Brendan. I want to talk a little bit more about gameplay and I guess some things like that. And I guess a take I have, I don't know if this is just something I want to throw out, but of the top 15 or 10 to 15 players in the world, I think now a maximum of 3 of them probably reside in the first adopter nations of Oceania. And the global game has really caught up. We saw it at PT1, and I think we're going to see it at PT2, that Flesh and Blood has become a truly global game with global player base and a diverse range of the best players in the world being from different regions.
Had this on mine as well. This like I said at the top, this we wrote these secretly from each other. I don't know if that's the right word, but yes, I've been very impressed.
We wrote our vows separately.
Yeah, I've been very impressed after getting exposure to other testing groups and other players recently. So I was in New York and I saw Michael Feng and Yuanji, and then I also was with Sean Yang at the team tournament, as well as Michael Hamilton, who I'd known a little bit before. But these players they're on the cutting edge, and I think that they are kind of trailblazing their own story. And I actually feel like at this point, they're not. There was a time in Flesh and Blood where I felt like people were keeping up with us, and now I feel like we're all running the same race / we need to keep up with them because these players are getting so good. And I think that top echelon, whether it's 10 or 15 players, has just gotten exceedingly good at not only playing the game, but deck building and appropriately testing and sort of adapting to metas and things like that. And they also happen to not live in Oceania. Okay.
Yeah. I think we're at a point now where it's really hard because we don't have the system in place right now, and then we've kind of already talked about that. Not going to rehash it with Elo, but I think if you were to try and name, the top dozen players in the world, or try and say like who are the top 20 players in the world, it's going to majority come from opinion of other players who have played against these players and a bit of a discourse, to be honest, because it's really hard right now with the way we don't have enough events to make Elo, I guess, a representation of the best players. And is it always, to be honest, because of how you can drop and gain Elo. But it's a really interesting thing to look at. I guess what we're going to find out is by the end of next year, we're going to have some PTs under our belt. We're going to have a number of callings. Consistent results to me is what is the marker of a good player. But also the way that people approach the game. People, we're going to have people who are known for deck building. We're going to have players who are known as limited specialists. We're going to have players who are known as classic constructed, as blitz specialists, whatever, as team specialists. And that's super exciting to me. And I can't wait for us to be like, these are the players, right? Like, these are the best players, And I think we've already got, we've had historically a bit of that because of the early adopters and where players sat and, multiple finishes and things like that. But we're going to get to a point where it starts to become, the game is big enough with multiple Pro Tours, it starts to become really legitimate, right? Like, if we get down the track next year and, someone like a Pablo Pintor or an Alexander Vore, made 3 top 8s of PTs, now you're starting to go like, this is, these are the players. So it's going to be cool to see.
Agreed.
All right, Brendan, before we wrap up, I got one more for you. It's gameplay related again. It's about design space, I guess, and what we might see with the game. My very last hot take for this episode 66 is we will get an absolutely broken combo deck in the next calendar year due to set releases, testing, LSS growth, things being missed, things like that. And some of these cards that are already catalysts for this they're out there already. You look at Aether Wildfires, your Blossoming Spellblades, your Cautions of the World, Three of a Kinds. I think it's inevitable, and I think we're going to see it.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if we don't have one for PT2.
Oh, okay.
I just
Don't give away the tip. No, I'm kidding.
yeah. Here's my combo: Viscerai without Polito Minimus. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, I think that as the card pool expands, it's just the liability on degenerate combos just gets higher and higher, and that's sort of inherent to an eternal game like this. So I definitely agree with you. I would take the under on that timeline.
Not a very hot take for me, then, is it? All right, fair enough, Brendan. Well, that's going to do it for, I guess, our main topic of episode 66. Where to next, Brendan? I think we've got a Google review, but I'm sharing a Google review this week. We've kind of inverted it.
Yes, we have.
All right. So if you do want to get your Google reviews in, or I guess any review for the podcast, we do really appreciate it. It does help us get out to more people out there, get the podcast kind of on those charts, etc. You can do that at ratethispodcast.com/Arsenal Pass. And then it'll take you to your preferred listening method, be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, whatever it is. And you can write your review there. This week's review comes from Winger, which is great. This might be my favorite. This is one that came in a little while ago, a couple of weeks ago, but I want to share it. It's a 5-star rating, and the title is The Weirdest Arsenal Podcast I've Ever Heard. Look, like everyone here, I was looking for the perfect podcast to give me the inside scoop on the Arsenal Football Club when I came across Arsenal Pass. My first thought was, yeah, they do pass, don't they? So I decided to give it a listen. The opening intro immediately hooked me. A Flesh and Blood podcast for players by players. First, how can a podcast have flesh and blood? Bet the idiots over at Tottenham Hotspur don't have this tech. Second, the players are making a podcast for other players. That's some 4D chess right there. I'm not sure which players are the hosts. The names they use aren't on the roster. Maybe these are aliases. Brendan toys with Hayden by tapping the desk and touching his microphone. Hayden claps back with his jabs about how Brendan hasn't won anything lately. Classic mind games from one pro to another. The players they discuss have names like the Chain Mirror and Prism is trash, or is she? It's absolutely wonderful to get the inside scoop from these savants. Then there's mentions of the Tall Timmy, an elusive character who appears to be the brains of the operation. Only 2 things are known about TT. He's tall, and he has most certainly helped his best friend Hayden win a national championship. Whatever they're paying him, it's not enough. Honestly, I have no idea what they're talking about half the time, but that hardly matters. They've cultivated a community that benefits from their wisdom and cares enough to fly out to New Jersey for some unknown reason. Prepare to be entertained and impressed. Thank you, Winger, for the review. As an Arsenal football fan, it definitely made me laugh quite a lot.
Yeah, I was actually looking at Arsenal podcast yesterday because I was wondering how far we were down on SEO, and there's a lot of big Arsenal Football Club podcasts. I was like, holy crap!
Biggest football club in the world, mate.
Yeah. I think our goal is just to trick a few of those people into hopping on the Flesh and Blood, I guess.
Well, I'm going to London after Pro Tour Lille, and I'm going to go and watch an Arsenal football game. Maybe I can wear some Arsenal Pass paraphernalia and get some people listening accidentally. Maybe I can try that. I can put up a banner. Maybe. I don't know. We'll try our best. Anyway, Brendan, that's been our Google review. That's been the pod for this week. Thank you for everyone for listening. Big shout out and thank you to our patrons as always. And me and Brendan are on Twitter. If you want to engage with us, if you want to get on Flesh and Blood Twitter, join the Fab Fitness Challenge community or any of the community over on Twitter for Flesh and Blood. Brendan is at BrendanAPG. I'm at Fian_Dale. And until next week, we'll see you then.
See you, everybody.